Okay.
Hi, Deborah. Hi, Eva. Hi, Sandra, Kathy, Gilia. Nice to see people coming in. Someone told me recently that you guys actually can't see how many people we have here. So we're already at over 180 people.
180. Yeah, I can't see.
People are joining. I think the panelists can see. I think the participants can't.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Maxine.
So Lex and I are starting to become, I'm afraid, daily buddies almost.
I think we live. There's something analogous to a neighborhood, and I think we are digital neighbors because we're running into each other at the store.
In the online Jewish world,
I do think we should.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I do think it might be good to start since folks are coming on in, and we're now at 8. So I'll do a quick little intro and then pass to Judith. So this is the 5th, 6th. This is some number of wonderful weekly edition of our quarantine book clubs, and we are thrilled to be offering this. We being JewishLIVE, but along with the Jewish Women's Archive that has just been holding this down incredibly, and this is one of JewishLIVE's weekly programs alongside some other really incredible options. We encourage you to check out the different weekly programs we have at this link, jewishlive.org/on-demand, which is where you can find out about all of the different offerings. There's some artistic offerings, there's some spiritual offerings, some intellectual offerings, some things that blur all of those together. And we're really excited to be offering those different things for you to be engaged even in this moment of physical distancing. So we hope that you'll check those out. And if you want to access past editions of this show of the Quarantine Book Club or any of our others, you can access those from that same page and just click on whichever show you're looking for, and you'll be able to watch past videos. So stay tuned for more incredible shows with the Quarantine Book Club. It's just been an incredible host of guests. And Abby Stein today is just awesome. And Becoming Eve is an incredible book. So with that, I'll pass back to Judith, who is going to be steering us through this incredible conversation.
Thank you, Lex. I am really glad to be here. Welcome everybody to the Quarantine Book Club. I'm Judith Rosenbaum. I'm the CEO of JWA, the Jewish Women's Archive. I'm very glad to be with all of you tonight. And we have already more than 250 people here with us, so that's fabulous. I have to admit, I'm getting a little tired of the quarantine itself, but I am loving the opportunity for all of us to be together for the Quarantine Book Club. So thank you, as I said, to those of you who came on earlier for being a bright spot in my week each week. This is one of JWA's many programs. We are a digital archive that helps expand the Jewish narrative by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories and drawing on the richness of our history for insight and for wisdom about how to think about the world today and our place in it. So please check out jwa.org. There's so much more to find there. If you're looking for other virtual programs that we've done in the past, those are also, you can find them on our site. We also have a podcast, which might be of interest to you. And I'm excited to share that we are also developing a new series on Jewish women's history, a virtual series on Jewish women's history that we're going to be launching in June. So stay tuned for more of that. A tiny bit of logistics before I introduce Abby for tonight. As you have already seen, we have a large crowd. So as you see, we don't have video and audio enabled for the participants, but we do very much want to make this feel engaging and interactive. So as you've seen, we encourage people to introduce themselves in the chat box with your name and where you're located. And once we start the conversation, you should also feel free to put questions in the chat box, which I will weave into our conversation. So tonight, we are so lucky to have with us Abby Stein, who has so much to teach us about how to become the person that you are meant to be. Abby was born and raised in a Hasidic family in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. She is a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism. And in that world, raised as a boy, Abby attended yeshiva and became a rabbi in 2011. She left the Hasidic world, I think, the following year and came out as a trans woman in 2015. And since then, Abby has been working as a brilliant educator, writer, speaker, and activist, in addition to also being a student at Columbia. And her beautiful memoir, Becoming Eve, which have right here, came out in the fall, and as I understand, was just released on audiobook. So if you haven't read it yet, I encourage you to get a copy or to download it as an audiobook. And welcome, Abby. Thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm going to ask you for just a second because I want to share it on Facebook. Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. We're good.
Great.
Well, hi, everyone. And I'm glad actually you mentioned the Jewish Women's Archive podcast. I don't remember how it's called. Don't hate me
It's
for
called
it,
Can We Talk? Yes, I should have mentioned
Can We Talk? And I did a segment that I really like. And I think there are parts that people, obviously the book is 250 pages. I wrote 400 and it's 250 and I still didn't get everything I wanted to get in. So I think during the podcast, I did get in some details that are not in the book. So specifically after you've read the book, you really might enjoy the Jewish Women's Archive podcast.
Thank you for that plug. And I believe you wanted to start by sharing a little piece from the book.
I did. So I want to share two parts, but also just for the run of it, my internet sometimes gets unstable. If that happens, let me know. I will switch to my phone.
Okay.
Or I can put on earphones. Anything needed. I am very aware of tech issues, so please tell me.
Okay, no worries.
I want to start by, I think, reading the first part that to me is going to turn into a thank you for the 285 people, and I don't know how many more on Facebook who are tuned in. So this part is from the epilogue, the final part of the book, and it's actually the only part of the book that it does focus on me after coming out. I think a lot of people were expecting the book to focus a lot more on my transition and my leaving. And to be honest, originally I was hoping to do that as well. And then as we got to I got chronologically to 2012 and I had written 400 pages, started talking with my editor, and she's like, we need to get this down to 250. As it was. So the book as it was ends in 2012, where I felt it was a perfect moment of that realization of, hey, it's time to become Eve, which is literally the last line. But that is far from the end of the story. And then the epilogue jumps ahead by 3 years, and we can talk, obviously, we'll get to talking more about it. But there's one specific part, which is my conversation with my dad, with my father, or Tati, as we used to call him, and as he is in the book. And so this is just for a bit of context. I don't want to spoil anything, but this is happening in the apartment of an Upper West Side rabbi, a progressive rabbi that has been helping me a lot. I think he's going to come up a bit more as this conversation goes on. And my dad had a relationship with him also up to that point. And I was sitting down with my dad trying to explain to him what I was feeling. Fine, I thought. Tati doesn't believe that that is possible. He's going to say that being transgender is impossible, that trans people don't exist, and he will brush us off. After all, I had heard far less religious people say such things. I couldn't expect Tati to be any different. This time, however, Tati surprised me. Okay, yes, he said. It is possible that there are people in the world whose souls and bodies are different, and it can be real. But you need a tzaddik, a righteous person who has a Holy Spirit within him to know that for sure. Or if there's any Yiddish speakers, you need a tzaddik about HaKodesh, for those who might have gotten it. He seemed very sure of his assertion. I've seen 2 therapists and a doctor who all agree with me that I'm a girl, I told him. They're not tzaddiks, but they know it's true. And this is the part I want to focus on. But do you think that it is okay with, do you think that is okay with Judaism? He lamented. I'm sitting here with a rabbi, I responded, and you ask me if it's okay with Judaism? My rabbi thinks that it is. Tati turned to the rabbi. So you agree? You think Judaism accepts this? Do you allow people like this into your synagogue? Definitely, the rabbi exclaimed. Now here's the thing, I never forgot it. And I think at the moment, my response to my dad was very much like what I could tell him in the moment, that, hey, I think it's okay. But it was also a bit weird to me because we're talking here after a 3-year period when I wasn't religious, and my dad was very much aware. I am today a lot more involved and engaged in Judaism and in Jewish communities than I was at the time. And like to him, his response of, do you think that is okay with Judaism, was a lot more about making a statement and say, hey, I can't accept that, as opposed to being, oh, do you really think? It wasn't a real question for what he was expecting a real answer. Now, I say that a lot. And I think some people will think that I have daddy issues, and I don't care, because maybe I do. But to me, every time I sit down or stand up or speak in front of a Jewish audience, I've given like over 400 speeches. I haven't counted all in quarantine, so probably a lot more than that over the past few years, and more than half of them have been in Jewish settings. Like I'm looking like on my screen right now, and I see Judith, who looks amazing, and the books behind you, which is also amazing. But I also see a big, I don't know who is tuned in, but one of the forward box just says Jewish Women's Archive. And the Jewish part seems to be very proudly on there. I think everyone who signed up today came through either JWishLIVE or Jewish Women's Archive. It's very obvious that this is not just an event about a book about transgender people, about LGBTQ issues. It's a book about Jewish transgender people. And to me, this is the better response to my dad. I'm like, I don't know. Let's ask the 307 people who are tuned in here. Let's ask the thousands of people this week alone that I've engaged with. The thousands of people who have shown up to events personally, knowing very well what the topic is going to be, whatever it was synagogues or temples or Hillels or JCCs all across the world. Because here's what I think. I think each and every one that is tuned into today isn't just hopefully going to have a good time, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation, and hopefully they're going to go and buy the book if they haven't read it. Yes, all of that as well. But more than anything else, for me, this is sending a message that we think that, yes, we think that it's not just that LGBTQ Jewish people exist. That is a reality. We don't need anything to prove that. But that being Jewish and being queer is not just okay, but it's beautiful. And that we bring all of us, when we bring all of who we are together, it creates something beautiful. So first and foremost, thank you all for being here, because you are sending a very strong message. Now we can dive into the actual book. Well, that's also a part of the book, but I just felt the need to start that.
Well, I think it's such a powerful message about the richness of Judaism and of the Jewish community. And, you know, I think that often, even for those of us who are proud liberal Jews and knowledgeable liberal Jews, there sometimes can be this idea that somehow Orthodox people know more about what Judaism is, right? Or somehow have more information. And I think that what you're saying is also just a powerful reminder that there is so much to learn from all different kinds of Jews about what Judaism is and what our values are. So thank you for calling that out.
I would add to that a bit also. I think it was Reb Zalman Schachter. At least he used to say it. I don't know if it was his own saying, but I would say that the only authentic Judaism is a Judaism that recognizes that there is no authentic Judaism, which is ultimately the most authentic thing that you can do. Because like, I think the whole conversation of, oh, what is authentic? There isn't. If anyone who studied Jewish history or Jewish texts, which I love, you start realizing that throughout history, people have there was always different strands and different people. And it's not that the second we start being one is better than the other, we start excluding people, we start creating paradigms where so many people are not welcomed. I don't think that, obviously I have a lot of issues with specifically ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic Judaism as it is today. But I wouldn't think, though, yes, I wish they would do a lot of things differently, but I wouldn't think that they are less Jewish. And it sounds off because usually we're not used to that, but I believe that they are obligated to think, and we are, and everyone is obligated to recognize that our form of practice, whatever that is just as real and, for the lack of a better word, authentic.
One of the things that I think is really powerful about your book is that you're able to convey very clearly that even though you chose to leave the Hasidic community, that there are many things about it that you still find beautiful or that have shaped who you are and that are still a part of you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you're able to hold that?
Well, one of my closest friends today is a woman. Her name is Kate Kelly. You can all look her up. She's an amazing social justice advocate. She's currently she's a human rights lawyer working on civil rights actions, and specifically the Equal Rights Amendment, which I think, as a Jewish women's organization, that's a big deal. But one of the things that she asked me the first time, yes, ERA. One of the things, and so she grew up in a Mormon community, LDS church, and she actually was excommunicated, hardcore, actually went to a trial, which is apparently a thing there, and got convicted of apostasy. But one of the things that she asked me the first time we met, she was a fellow at Columbia Law School, I was a student at Columbia, and we started talking, and she's like, but aren't there things that you're missing from the Hasidic community, from your background? And I'm like, sorry, I don't miss anything. If I want something, I do it. And a lot of people, they are, for anyone who follows me on social media, you will see that whatever is the food or the songs or so much of my life today is for me to be able to realize that there are things that are beautiful in the Hasidic community. And it's not just that, oh, I'm stuck with certain things from my past. That's not what's going on here. What's happening is that I am able to look at my past, to look at my culture, to look at my tradition, and not just continue doing certain things because I can't stop, but to actually embrace them and see they are mine just like they're everyone else. Hasidic Judaism to me is quite literally my blood. That's not a metaphor. Quite literally in my blood. And we all have these parts that we want to look at and be like, this is beautiful, I want to hold on to it. The other parts, some parts are beautiful. I say some parts are beautiful, some parts are neutral, some parts are ugly. And we need to be able to say that we create our own paths within that. To me, that means I view Judaism today as something that I celebrate as opposed to something that I observe. To me, that means that there is an emphasis on humanistic messages that I found not just within Judaism, but even more so within Hasidic Judaism. Why letting go of the baggage that comes attached with it, by letting go of negative messages, and that's not just okay, that is beautiful. And I think that has been a big part. And some of that, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I'm curious how growing up in a community that was fairly black and white in its approach, how you were able to develop that worldview, because it feels like it would be hard.
It was. Oh no, growing up, it was black and white. It wasn't fairly. I say black and white in the mentality, and black and white literally, you were encouraged to wear black and white clothes, and so on. Well, I definitely did not get, this is the one part I didn't get directly, but when you start studying actually both from Hasidic texts, but for me it was more, I did reject everything for a while. Yom Kippur 2013, my idea of it was a camping trip where the menu was made out of pork, literally as much as possible, from every part of the day. It was my idea was I have a rabbi who calls that post-God traumatic disorder. I don't think it's necessarily a disorder, but I definitely grew up and I was like, you know what? I don't want to have anything to do with anything of this. Because in big part, I grew up with that everything or nothing mentality. And I grew up that there is one way to be Jewish, and that was ideally Hasidic, maybe other ultra-Orthodox Jews, and all the other Jews are just terrible human beings for not being more religious. So yes, it was a struggle. To me, it started out by, and it was almost I don't want to say kind of a switch that flipped. I don't want to say it was overnight. It was obviously a process, but that realization was almost overnight. That realization that it's not just okay. And I want to tell you something, and it sounds almost stupid, but I remember one of the times that I, until today, remembered that moment when I was really thinking about it. It was, I believe, in 2014. So we're looking at 2 years after I was leaving the community. So imagine 2 years after the book ends, if we're thinking in that context. And I was sitting a Friday night, it was a Thursday night with a group of friends, most of them also grew up in religious community. And someone was serving cholent or chulent, as we would call it. Which, for those who don't know what it is, it's a traditional Ashkenazi Jewish version of a stew, most made out of beans, potatoes, meat, and so on. And someone asked me if I want some, and I pushed away the plate, and I'm like, no, that's too Jewish. I can't eat it. And obviously, like, I think most people have left. I don't know how many other people would ever think that, and people would just be like, you like it, eat it. But I guess to me, everything had to be so ideological and so like intellectual. And I'm like, hey, if you are not Hasidic and if you are not religious, then why would you eat something that, I mean, and I know how it was developed. Like chulent is one of the like uniquely Jewish dishes that, first of all, every Jewish culture has a different version of it. Not always chulent, not always beans, but every culture has a different version. And it's something that developed directly out of like nuanced Jewish laws of cooking and Shabbat. Right. So the intellectual part wants to be like, hey, no, I can't eat this. Like, you're a hypocrite if you do. And that was one of the moments that I was thinking, but hey, I enjoy it. Why can't I just look at this, take it, and enjoy it? I think one of the, and I started reading, it was a long process, but one of the books and one of the people who's still alive when I started out, and I still got to meet him twice, the people that really helped was Reb Zalman Schachter Shalom. He's like considered the founder of Jewish renewal. And one of his books called Jewish with Feeling, and I think that really helped me, like it's not just what he's saying. So he goes into describing a few things that I think that are very like 60s hipster like messages that some people might find like challenging. Like he talks about like mikveh, which is a traditional ritual bath that people go to on Friday night. And he talks about like how in an ideal world, so he's very careful of saying in an ideal world or an ideal situation, going into like a naked bath with your family on Friday night, which by the way is against a lot of halachas, but that would be a perfect way of Shabbosing, what do you think, of celebrating Shabbat. Or he says that he once told a bar mitzvah boy that, you know, in Judaism there's a mitzvah to have sex on Friday night, and he's like, listen, I'm not going to tell you anything about masturbating, but if you do want to masturbate, perhaps on Friday night might be a good way of looking at it. These are all ideas that you look at it, and I think any like tradition, like people grew up like ultra orthodox, would be like, what the F are you saying? But when you think about it, it's saying that message. It's like you enjoy certain parts, just take it and don't just be okay with it. I wouldn't, if I would just go like, okay, I'm just gonna start doing things that I'm fine with, as opposed to being, I'm gonna do things that I enjoy and fully celebrate it and fully own them up, I wouldn't be able to do it because I'm crazy. Everything needs to make sense intellectually. I don't, that's not everyone, but I've had that. But to be able to say that that is not just okay, that's beautiful. That creates an environment where we all understand that there's no one size fits all. There's no Judaism that is a one size fits all, which quite frankly was what Hasidic Judaism was supposed to be from the get-go. But it turned into something very different. And to say that let go of the baggage and celebrate it. And I want to say, like, ultimately, that led to the co-creation. I co-created something called Sacred Space, and we're actually having our next one this Sunday. For anyone who wants to join, it's hosted by The Wing. I will post some information. Follow me on social media. I will post information. But the idea of it, and Kate Kelly, the friend I mentioned before, she's one of the co-creators of it, and a few other people, and it came out of that mentality. It's a space for women and non-binary people of literally every religious background. Like, it's a real multi-faith place. And the idea of it is to encourage people to take parts of their background, whatever that is, and celebrate that, continue enjoying them without like any like guilt of, oh, but I have to do it X, Y, and Z, and I have to do it in full.
Right. And also, I mean, first of all, I have to say, I didn't know that we shared a love of Reb Zalman in common. He's well, very close to my family.
On my desk, I have like 10 books on my desk. Some of them.
My husband has actually just edited a collection of Reb Zalman's writings that's coming out hopefully next month. If they can get out of the warehouse. And my daughter is in part.
These are two of the handful of books on my desk right now. This is Jewish with Feeling, and then this is a book actually that he wrote in the style of Hasidic rabbis in Hebrew. And they're on my desk.
And the idea, like, you know, what I love that you're describing is like the idea of being able to be creative, but rooted in what the traditional idea was. So maybe the practice looks very different, but it's not just out of nowhere, just what I feel like doing, but like really rooted in what the meaning was behind something, and feeling And in part, you have to know that. You have to really be learned in some ways to know how to play in that way, right? To be that creative that way, you have to have a sense of familiarity and comfort and like permission to play.
Well, I don't think it's by chance that a lot of renewal rabbis, Reb Zalman included, grew up Orthodox and many of them Hasidic. And I remember having this conversation a lot with Rabbi David Ingbar, who is like a Roman where I go now.
Yeah.
And we were like struggling, like, could we really create that mentality for people who were never Orthodox to begin with, or never had, like you're talking of people like Reb Zalman, or look at Reb Art Green, or like pretty much everyone I think who founded a new movement in Judaism at some point was either Hasidic or at least Orthodox. Which does, I think it does create, we're not going to go into this, but it does create a challenge sometimes. I do believe that it's possible to create environments and educational systems that offer that kind of in-depth knowledge for everyone to be able to do that on their own, but that's a longer conversation.
So let's take a step back. You've written this beautiful memoir about your journey as someone who, that was raised in the Hasidic world and has left it, and was raised as a boy and has become a woman, or has, expressed herself as a woman, maybe was always a woman. So, there's sort of two strands here about religion and gender that are coming together, or a story of going, as they say, off the derech, off the kind of path, and coming out as a woman. How do you see those two stories as related to one another? Because they're so tightly woven in your book and in your life, obviously.
I don't actually, I think talking about them as two separate stories, and like even for me, I sometimes say like first transition, second transition, it helps for people to grasp it. But in reality, and I think for anyone who reads the book, it becomes very clear, I can't really separate them. They always went hand in hand, not just on the superficial level, like even in depth. Like I would when I struggle more with religion, I struggle more with gender. And when I could find, I had these few years when I call it high on Kabbalah, or high on mysticism, I was able to if I was able to suppress religious questions, I'm able to I guess maybe suppress my own feelings and so on. So it obviously went hand in hand. But I would say on a more tangible level, some of the things where it really overlaps is first and foremost having to re-educate yourself about the world in every sense of the word. Experiencing the world in a new way, and the world that you knew before doesn't really exist for you anymore. And I think that is very true for LGBTQ people, specifically trans people, and for people leaving such a fundamentalist community, and in this case, the Hasidic community. In the Hasidic community, there's almost there's no way back. There is no oh, today I'm gonna go be in college and dress I don't know, like a general New Yorker, and tomorrow I'm gonna, just go back into the Hasidic community. It doesn't work like that. You start experiencing the world. To me, it was a full-blown culture shock on ironically, to some extent, leaving the community had more, I would say, more logistical challenges, because I didn't know the language, had no education, didn't know how, forget about speaking to the opposite gender, whatever that even means. I didn't know how to speak to people. I walked into Starbucks the first time and I legitimately freaked out. I never went to a place like that, and my family never eats at restaurants. The closest we ever got to eating at a restaurant was before Pesach, before Passover, when we would order takeout, and that's it. And so on. And then clothing, oh my God. I went literally from black and white clothes to an pretty much infinite amount of options. And you know nothing about it. I was never told anything about how you match designs and not designs, how you match colors, nothing, not even a bit. And obviously education, I think, was another huge issue. And then the same thing happens when you come out as trans. You have to figure out how to dress. You have to figure out how to interact with people all over again. The world sees you as very, very different. There's no overstating that. The way, it's not just even doing something that you would think it doesn't matter, but everything changes. You have to think and to me, it was also I think the cultural shock when I came out was the one thing that really shocked me was sexism, which is weird. I'm talking even living in New York, and even being at Columbia, which is supposed to be one of the most progressive colleges in the world. And the subtle for the lack of a better word, and then I don't know, maybe some people don't like social justice words, but like all these like microaggressions, so to speak, really, really matter. And like I remember for me, and I actually wrote an article for it was Glamour L magazine. I wrote for both, but one of them was about the sexism specifically. I think it was Glamour magazine, experiencing that sexism, and like nothing, like I knew, and I was like a feminist when I was 12 years old. I got into trouble for asking my dad why only the women and my sisters have to prepare Shabbat dinner in the kitchen while the boys just sit on the couch and read stuff. And that was obviously, I think it was very strongly like it came from a part of like my own feelings and like my own awareness of who I was. But the reality of like that first time I realized that I have to think twice before going outside alone at 10 o'clock, or like the realization that that people who like your Facebook post might not really like anything you're saying, they just really like the makeup or the clothing that you're wearing, and like the kind of sexual harassment that starts coming, like it was almost like immediately these things were the cultural shock. So I would say it was less of a logistical and more of an emotional cultural shock, versus when I left the community, it was more of a logistical and also cultural, but the logistical part was harder. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's a lot of overlapping in the OTD, whatever you want to fry, we say a lot fry community, like formally religious, wherever you want to look at it. We use a lot of similar lingo. People say like in the closet, we use coming out. We even had a say for a while, there was this YouTube channel called It Gets Besser, which is Yiddish for better. It was a play on the LGBT, it gets better. And there are a lot of similarities. I wrote an essay for a book that a friend of mine wrote about like atheists and the LGBTQ community, and like how the struggle that a lot of people have in general with leaving fundamentalist communities really have similarities. Never going to say it's the same, because quite frankly, I also don't think that two people have the same struggle with anything. But there are a lot of similarities between that and coming out.
It's so interesting, right? It's probably not communities that necessarily talk to each other about their experiences, but except for the people who have shared both of them, right? It's so interesting to be able to share that wisdom. One question that came up, actually not in the chat, but someone I know emailed me earlier about it was, and wanted me to ask you this question was,
that's not fair. If they want, they should.
Do you still consider yourself a rabbi, right? You were ordained when you were in the Hasidic world. How do you relate to that? I mean, you still have the same knowledge, right, that you had before, but how do you think about that part of your identity?
There's two parts to say here. For a long time, I didn't use it at all. And the biggest two reasons why is, so the Hasidic community has a very different system of who is a rabbi, okay? Yes, there is ordination. You can be ordained and you would be considered, like I legitimately got a letter that says, Yoreh, Yadin, Yadin, which means you are allowed to answer questions, to answer halachic questions. You are pretty much to be considered a rabbi. Like I actually have documents, like for anyone, people have tried to challenge me before, and I've just shown them like documents that I got from my own community where like that is a title. But at the same time, if you run a synagogue or if you teach at a yeshiva, even if you were not ordained, you will also be called a rabbi. It's like, it's a bit weird. And then like in order, what I was on the path to become, which we usually would call, in English it would be rabbi, yes, but in like in Hasidic lingo, we would call that a dayan or a dayan, which would be someone who answers questions. For that, you need to do another part, which is called shimush, which is kind of, for the lack of a better term, kind of the equivalency of an internship where you work with an actual rabbi. I never finished that part. So like, while yes, I was called rabbi, I was titled rabbi, I have legal documents and like rabbinic documents that say that, I also always felt, but I did work as a rabbi, ironically, not in the sense of what I got my ordination, but I was teaching in yeshiva, which usually gives you the title rabbi regardless. So there was all these parts, and obviously was using, but I felt a bit of uncomfortable. And I think another major part of that as well was the fact that in the outside of the Hasidic community, so like even rabbis who get ordained by Yeshiva University, and that becomes even more true for people who go to non-Orthodox rabbinical schools, everything from JTS, HUC, Hebrew College, like all of these schools, you also get pastoral training, which is how to deal with kindness, all these things. That's not part of the Hasidic Smicha program. That's not something you ever get. And I felt like for a long time, I felt like that in the outside world, when people think about rabbi, they think about someone who is halfway the social worker and has the training for it. I do think I've made up for that, and I've done a lot of rabbinical educational programming. I've done a lot of things to make up for that, and I have worked with congregants a lot, which maybe by now I do it, but at least in the beginning that was a big struggle. The other part was internal, which intellectually, I spoke before about my struggles intellectually and emotionally. Like intellectually, I was aware, specifically in the outside of the Orthodox world, rabbis could be women. Most rabbis that I know today and women and friends that are rabbis are women, both cis women and trans women, like that. But that has always been. I am dating a girl who is in rabbinical school right now. I have known, and in everywhere, I know, yes, rabbi is not gendered. But to me, it was just so ingrained. Like growing up, rabbi was a man and Rebbitzin was a woman, and that's it. And though Rebbitzin was most of the time a title that you just got based on who you were married to. So that was like more of, I think, a mental blockage to using the term. I've slowly gotten more and more comfortable with it. It's still not something that I wouldn't use the title on a day-to-day basis. I used to object to people using it. I don't object that anymore. My girlfriend has been on a crusade to get me to start using it again a lot more. I did do, like, over the past 2 summers, for example, I studied at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem at their Rabbinic Torah seminar, which only takes rabbis. And like I'm a member of JWA, which is the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, which is also like, you have to be a rabbi to be part of it, and so on. So like, I think I have grown a lot more comfortable. I am not at a point where I would start using that on a day-to-day basis yet. Could happen. But also, like, it's not my day job. I feel like I work in public policy, and they're like, if you start, I'm very strong fan of separation between state and church. And I think the second you start mixing policy and rabbi, obviously you can't do it. And I know a lot of rabbis do amazing policy work outside of, like, both bringing in their religious knowledge, but outside of being like, I'm a rabbi and that's why X, Y, and Z. So that is another part why I'm hesitant. I do think there's a possibility. There's several different rabbinical schools and other programs where you can do like pastoral training or clergy training. Maybe if I do that, I will feel more comfortable with it. I don't know. That is I know it sounds very long, but this is actually a very short answer to something that is on my mind a lot and I get asked a lot. And I will say finally, ultimately, I do believe in using it when I can. Like when I feel like I want to put out some text, and like I have online on Sefaria. For those who want to look it up, it's SEFARIA, Sefaria.org. I have over 50 source sheets where I take my rabbinical knowledge, I take what I studied in yeshiva and what I studied both halachically and on how to dissect the Talmudic text, how to dissect the Mishnah and the Medrash. I definitely use that. And sometimes I will be like, when people try to like start to be like, but hey, X, Y, and Z, I'm like, hey, with my rabbinical training, I want to tell you whatever I want to tell you. So like, which I know it's totally like picking and choosing when to use it, but sometimes it carries some weight, and sometimes we have to do that. We have to use it.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It sounds like this is in progress, like all aspects of identity are, and especially when you're navigating a past that is complicated and that you've left parts of behind. But, you know, I think it is important to own the work that you've done and the title that you've earned, even if it's something that feels like it doesn't totally make sense to you in certain ways. There have been a bunch of questions in the chat about your secular education and sort of how you caught up, at what point you learned English. I would also love to hear about what it was like to write a book in a language that was not your native language, and the language that you learned.
My fourth language, pretty much.
Your fourth language, wow.
We'll talk about
that.
Yeah,
so tell us a little bit about that journey, because I know that is such a challenge for so many people who leave the ultra-Orthodox community.
Well, so obviously the language. Growing up at school, we studied ABCs. I couldn't even go from A through Z growing up. I knew how to write my name and address. Like our educational level was a 3rd grade level with English, and same with math. The last thing we ever studied in 8th grade was long division, and that's it. They never even attempted to teach anything beyond that. So, and then like there was no, like I never got any science, social studies, history. That's not even on the curriculum. It doesn't even exist in the cheder, in the school that I went to, which is another thing. I'm not going to go into that. For anyone who wants to check out yafed.org, it's another organization that is doing amazing work on the field of education in the Hasidic community. So that was how I was going after I left. We also studied Hebrew, or more like what we would call Lushan Kodesh, Holy Song, which is like a Hasidic version of Hebrew, but I was perfectly fluid, and like I started writing most of the things that I would write, like in yeshiva, for example, everything spoken was in Yiddish, but everything written was in Hebrew. So like announcements on the bulletin board was in Hebrew, written, like I got used from a really young age when I was around 12 to like listen to a lecture, a class given in Yiddish and take notes in Hebrew. And that is something that stays with me until today. I just did, for example, a few months ago, I did a training with the LGBT Victory Institute where they trade, it's political training. And I was just sitting next to this other person that I met at the conference, at a training. And like in the middle one day, she was like showing me my notes. And she's like, what is that? I mean, without even realizing, I was listening to a lecture in English and started taking notes in Hebrew. It's just ingrained. So Hebrew was there. And then we also studied Aramaic. In the school that I went to, I actually had classes in Aramaic grammar and whatever, like in its own way. I never spoke Aramaic. There's no one to speak to really. I did visit an Aramaic speaking community when I was in Jerusalem once, just to see how it is. Though they spoke Assyrian Aramaic. The Aramaic you teach usually is what we would be called Galilean Aramaic. It's a bit different, but it was more than enough to understand. So I could hypothetically speak Aramaic if I want to. So depending on how you count it.
There may be a few Aramaic speakers still left in Iraq or Iran. I know there were some little tiny.
They are half a million Aramaic
not Jews.
Not Jews. Yes, they are Syrian. Yeah. No, there are actually 100,000 Jews in Israel who are, their first language is Aramaic. Jews who come from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. Yeah. Oh damn! It says that my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me normally?
I can hear you. You were a little bit frozen, and I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but yeah.
No, that's fine. Don't worry. So yeah, so they are apparently, according to Wikipedia, take a bit of grain of salt. There are 100,000 Aramaic speakers in Israel right now. And yes, and then, but also there's like one of the churches, one of the like ancient like Orthodox churches in Jerusalem, still does like services in Aramaic every week. Right. Anyway, so yeah, so then like that was one of the biggest hurdle both for leaving and for education. I had to start studying English, and it wasn't easy. It's one of the other parts where you leave the community and you're like an immigrant. You are in a new culture where you know nothing about, and you don't know the language either. And that was a struggle. But one of the, I think, additional struggles to that was people were expecting me to speak English. So to give you an example, when I started school at Columbia, and the school that I was at Columbia was specifically for non-traditional students. So students that are not coming straight out of high school. And they make you, because they have a lot of international students, if you are an international student, they make you take a placement exam for English. And then if your English is not perfect, then you have to take a remedial class before you take what's called university writing, which is the like English class that everyone takes. And I had one friend, a lot of people might know him, Lipa Schmelzer, who was also in school at the same time. He's a Hasidic singer, whatever. And we started at the same time. And he mentioned in his essay that he didn't grow up speaking English. So they made him take it also, the placement test. But for me, I mentioned I grew up Hasidic, but I didn't mention that specific detail that I grew up speaking, that I grew up speaking like Yiddish and not English. And they never even asked me to take it. But then it ended up becoming a struggle because then I had to go and fight with them. There's like a program that I have for people who speak English as a second language, which will help you get access to a writing center, whatever. And they told me I can't get access. You were a New Yorker. This is only for international students. And I had to go and like convince them that I didn't go speak English. So it's a huge struggle. And then there's the education. Right. I didn't leave fully, but like I decided that I want to go to college in January 2012. Okay. I had to study for 2 full years and a bit more than that to even get my high school diploma. Because I forget about never having been in a classroom setting. I just didn't know anything. I didn't know English, science. I didn't know anything. And at that time, I didn't even speak English. So my earliest like science classes, for example, I started out by listening to scientific classes on YouTube that were in Hebrew. And to this day, a lot of scientific terms I know in Hebrew better than I know in English, which is weird. It's like not my first language either. It's just another language that I know well, whatever. It is what it is. And then once I got my high school diploma, I started applying to colleges. And to be honest, at the time, I knew, but I wanted to stay in New York because I just left my community, and that was enough change as it is. But I thought I can only apply to like community college, like no one else is going to take me. And then I had a friend who was at NYU, and NYU has a school, and I don't remember how it's called, SPS, I think, which is also a school for non-traditional students. And the biggest part was you didn't have to take your SATs. So I applied to that, got into that program. And then I think like my ego got boosted a bit, or like whatever you want to call that. And then I had a few friends at Columbia, and they were like, no, you need to try, you need to apply. And like, for those who know, Columbia's acceptance rate is like really, really low, and it's not easy. But I worked for a few months. I took, I think, somewhere between, I don't know, 8 to 10 practice tests for the SATs, which is a requirement that I had to take. And I didn't believe I was going to get in until I got a phone call. And I was at that, it was the summer 2014, I will never forget it. I was interning at the JCC in Manhattan. For those who know, I was sitting on the 7th floor, right outside the library. And they just called me because it was close to the semester. So they wanted me to fill out forms, whatever. Usually they just send a letter, but they called me up, and that was it. But I would say it was a struggle. My first year at Columbia, and it was also the fact that I wasn't coming out yet. I was struggling with emotional and mental issues, but also just, it was my first time in a classroom setting. It was my first time doing any of it, and it was extremely overwhelming. I think another issue, which is like why I've been telling that to a lot of friends who were like, even if you think you do really well in a high school exam, and I'm not gonna, obviously, I would be a hypocrite if I tell people don't apply to a good college, but like, I think what for me, when like, for example, when I took high school equivalency classes, I took the exam, I was doing really well, but suddenly I found myself surrounded by kids where everyone did really well on their high school exam. So like, I think that was also a bit, you know, it's not a good boost to your, I don't know, I don't want to hear, but to your like how you feel when suddenly you're around like everyone is smart. Like, what's the point? But yeah, so that was kind of my journey, and yeah.
So you decided to add, to make it simpler for yourself by adding writing a book to the mix.
Well, here's the thing. I love writing. I started writing when I was like, I think 5. I still have some of these things that I've written. In the book, I translated something that I wrote at 9. I still have the Yiddish version of it, and I translated it into English. So I always used to write, and to me, writing was, there were several different parts to it. I was encouraged to write, actually, like in my family, like everyone has published books. Like my dad has published a few books. My grandparents, I had like my maternal great grandfather. There's already like over 40 books, all like on Jewish topics that have already been published, and the family still estimates there's more than double than that that's not even published yet. So like, it's definitely in my blood, and I've definitely encouraged to do that. I also found it very therapeutic, specifically when I was young. Like that prayer, part of it was, yes, I really believe that if I pray to God that I should wake up as a girl, my 9-year-old self believed that God is going to listen. Whatever God did or not, that's up to anyone else to decide. But another part of it was I found it therapeutic to write down my thoughts, and that lasted in yeshiva. And then as I was leaving, it was blocks, and I had total anonymous blocks, and no one even knew it was me. And first it was in Yiddish, and then as my English got better, I started writing in English. And when I started to transition before, like a few months before I came out, I started another blog where I was writing in English. And there was several different parts to it. Part of it was therapeutic for myself. I was hoping that it will help at least some people out there. At that time, I was not expecting anything to go viral, anything to become so public. And then when it came to writing a book, it was a mix of, I think it's a story that doesn't exist. Not just there's a Hasidic trans person that has published the book. I'm not even aware of another trans person from a fundamentalist background that has published the book, which is, I think the combination of religion and gender needs to be explored a lot more. There's the part where it really helped me. And also the fact that I have, and I know I'm not trying to show off, but totally to show off, I have a collection of hundreds, if not more, and I actually keep them, of messages, emails, comments that people are like, this is helping me in this way, this helped me. And I've been thinking a lot, and I've been collecting them, and I'm hoping one day they might actually turn into a book. But I mentioned before, I've given like 400 speeches. At every single one of them. I'm not making that up. And by every single one, I mean, even like at a place like El Limur, where I do like 7 sessions, at every single session, I've had at least one person, usually more, with a personal story. And it's not always about LGBTQ issues. Yes, I get a lot. I will almost always have someone who will say my son, neighbor, daughter, cousin, child, whatever. There's someone who they know that is trans or LGBTQ. But I've had so many from people who are simply like, the need to feel, to get a permission almost to be ourselves, which unfortunately isn't a given. It should be a given, but it isn't. And I know that I struggle with that. I am not the smartest person on the planet, and I'm not the most, I don't have the biggest self-confidence, and it took me a long time to feel confident enough. And if I can't give that to other people, it feels good. I'm not going to deny that, but it's also an obligation.
Yeah, it's really important work. There have been a number of questions about your relationship with your family now. And I think that's also a question for anyone who writes a memoir, sort of how do you navigate those, the personal parts of your story, or the pieces that don't only have to do with you, right? That have to do with other people's stories and that necessarily come up when you're willing to share parts of yourself.
Yeah, well, I think for anyone who has read my book, my family comes off quite accurately and quite nice. Like I did grow up in a loving family. I will never deny that, and I make that very clear in the book. I might have some opinions about specifically my dad that are not the most flattering, but I didn't even put that in. My mom specifically, my mom is an angel, like really is. Like she is someone that did everything at home. My dad has 13 kids and changed a diaper once in his life. He never did anything. She did everything from cooking. She worked from home. She has been cooking 3 meals for my dad and for the kids at home always since I remember. Even when I remember when my younger siblings were born, before she went into labor, she prepared like meals in the freezer for weeks to come. And I have no idea how she does that, because I have cooked meals the way she does and I get exhausted. I never remember her being like, she did everything. And I honestly have nothing negative to say other than I wish she was allowed. I'm not going to go into all the details of what's going on right now, but at least she was allowed to have these conversations. I was never allowed to talk to her coming out. It sounds weird, but I asked my dad to talk to her and he said no, which, yeah, it is how it is. But so like for me, I did try quite a lot. Like we removed some things. There were some stories about teachers hitting me. There's one of them that I left in, but I changed the name. And there's some other stories that I took out, partially with also the lawyers. The publishers' lawyers were like, if you don't have proof, it's illegal to get kids. And if you don't have proof, you can be like sued. But also because I felt like, what's the point? I think people get the message. And I did, we waited a lot. And specifically after I finished writing 400 pages and we had to start cutting down, and I was sitting with my editor, some of the stories that got caught were the worst stories about individuals. Specifically when I'm not gonna give away any juicy details, but the part where I'm having an affair with a boy in yeshiva, I used a different name, I used a different place where he's from, a different age, and so on, to make sure. And I think a lot of people who have read it have told me that they were quite surprised that there's no, like I think a lot of people were expecting boogeymans in the book, and there aren't a lot of boogeymen, because I wasn't trying to put anyone else down, or communities, but simply to tell the story and to talk about people in the best way possible. I can't say much details because it's in the works, but we're working now on scripting the book into a TV show or movie and in a show abroad. Plans. I can't talk but one of the things that we constantly talk about is that I want to make sure that first of all that people come off real, but also that I focus a bit on these people not just from my own perspective. And obviously in the book it is a memoir, so I didn't do that much, but I do think a lot about by telling stories of like, what do my siblings think? What do and I don't think any of I saw some people ask that question. I don't think any of my family members or siblings, even the ones that I do talk to, I have a relationship with 2 out of 12 of my siblings. I don't think they read English, either one of them. We never had anything English at home, even like ultra orthodox English magazines, but not allowed. So like, I assume my mom could read English if she wants. Other than a bill or a 1-page thing, I've never seen her read anything in English. So I don't know. I don't think anyone had read it. I don't know what they would think if they do. There has been a lot of talk about translating into Yiddish. There's no money in it, so we're always trying to figure out what would be a way to do it where at least I don't lose a lot of money, but we'll see.
I want to talk a little bit, we've talked a little bit about, kind of how you understand your Jewish life and how you gotten to where you are, although there's so much more we could go into, oh my God, and we're running out of time. But I want to hear a little bit about some of your political activism too, and what your experience has been as an activist. You were on the steering committee for the Women's March during a controversial time for the organization. And sort of how do you see that political piece of your work?
Well, I would say in a strong way, there's two parts that I usually look on. Like with the Women's March, to use the Women's March as an example. For me, it was, do we gain more by staying involved, or do we need to disengage? There were issues there. I don't think anyone denies that, if not no one Jewish. But the question to me was boiled down to, will me getting involved actually help, or will it just be like putting a blanket, seal on something? And we were given some promises, commitments made by the Women's March that were actually kept. We were told that there's going to be a new board, which to me was already a big deal, because I knew that if we don't get involved, the reality is that right now, and I'm not going to talk, I'm not that much involved anymore, but the Women's March now, which is still a national organization, has 15 board members now, and 3 of them are Jewish, including a mainstream rabbi. That would not have happened if we didn't stay engaged. If they did, there were no Jews on the steering, because the steering committee, another commitment that we were made was the steering committee will have the ability to stay involved with choosing the new board, and we ultimately were. So that was a big deal. So that was I think the biggest thing that I look at. It's very easy to just do the cool thing. I think I've by now gained enough of a name that I could just go on and focus on the non-controversial things for the rest of my life, and I will be doing just fine and get just enough coverage. People always no, you do it because you want to be in the news. I'm like, okay, so this week, actually this Sunday, I did an event in Argentina. And you don't have to trust me. Google my name and check, just do articles for the last week. There have been hundreds of articles on BBC and on the biggest newspapers. And I did something not controversial at all. I just did an event with the Jewish community. I can continue to do that. But what's the point? There's a lot of people who can do that. We need to have these hard conversations. One of the other things that I was very involved with has been bail reform, which is, again, probably not easy. I mean, when I started doing it, it wasn't as controversial as it became after it was passed and everything. And I stood up, and a few days after the Muncie stabbing, which was to me very personal, I knew the family really well. It was at a community where I worked. I used to teach at the yeshiva in Forshay, at Rabbi Rottenbeck's yeshiva in 2011. So it was very personal to me. And I stood a few days after that in the front of City Hall and argued that we should not roll back bail reform and so on. None of these were the easiest position, but things that I really believed in. And I think ultimately that is one of the biggest kind of measures. Do we gain more by doing something? Or I do think that sometimes they are organizations or groups or issues where we just need to say, sorry, this isn't working, and step back. But we need to weigh that and see what is the outcome that we want. I think another example of this is right now. There's been a lot of hate towards the Hasidic community. Hate is never justified. Period. No but, no on. The question is, there is a minority within the Hasidic community who hasn't been listening. And I think that happens specifically during funerals. There's no question.
You're talking about social distancing and
I don't like social distancing. Sorry, physical distancing.
Physical distancing, yes, that's better.
We are socially right now getting very close to 300 people. Physical distancing. Anyway, that's just my personal opinion. But I actually think in this time, I just want to say, we are talking about it. I think physical distancing actually, we might be physical distancing, but we're socially getting closer. I've had the opportunity to socially get closer to so many people because of this. And today, I started seeing videos again. Today, there was literally, again, another funeral of my cousin, I know it, in Borough Park, and all over the same thing again. The question to me, and I tweeted about that today, and there's a Mishnah where one of the rabbis is saying, oi. I don't know how to translate oi, but oi to me if I don't say something, and oi if I do say something.
Right.
And I constantly, like, almost every tweet, I think, is this gonna help? And I want to say, like, people are like, oh, you don't really care about the Hasidic community. I will disagree with that, but putting that aside, my son is being raised in that community. So can we please agree that I kind of care about my son? You want to argue with that? I don't know what to tell you, but it's not hypothetically to me. It's real. And I constantly have to think, like, yes, I want to say something. I have on social media hundreds, if not thousands. Like I know on Instagram, for example, I can see on the insights that about like more than like now it's like 1,200 of my Instagram followers are not online on Shabbat ever, which means they are hundreds of Orthodox people. So it's not just hypothetically. Like I say something, hopefully people are gonna see it. Hopefully people, even if some people are gonna listen, and I think we've all seen these memes. Just taking out one person from a group of people could have very strong impact. But at the same time, there's unjustified hate, there's anti-Semitism that is never okay. And we need to make sure that it's anything we say, whether it's on Twitter or public, that it's doing more good than it's doing bad. I'm not saying it's always going to be good. You're always going to get people going to get angry. If you just want to say stuff that that everyone is going to like, go live in a cave by yourself. That's not the point. It's just ultimately, and I think that has been my philosophy when it comes to activism. We need to make sure that we go out with a game and that we do good.
That makes sense. It seems realistic that to, have realistic sense of how complicated it is, but to go into things with the right attitude. You mentioned a little bit in that answer about some of the challenges that are happening in the Hasidic community now around coronavirus. And I also just wanted to ask if you would address a little bit about some of the particular challenges that the trans community is having in this moment as well, because I think we're not hearing about that in the news in the same way that we're hearing about, obviously, the terrible devastation that's happening in the Hasidic community.
Oh no, it's terrible. Like I don't know in numbers. I do think that there might be, I honestly don't know, I'm not a doctor. I think there might be a high percentage of trans people that might be immune compromised. Is that the word? The exact? Right. Specifically people who are right after surgeries and so on. I will say that on the other hand, the majority of trans people who follow the care that is assigned to them are probably the healthiest people on the planet, because we have to do blood work all the time, and like my vitamin levels always have to be perfect and everything is perfect. So we all might be healthier. So I don't know about that part. So I don't know if there's a higher, I don't know the numbers. It's possible. I have no idea. We do have high, the LGBT and trans community has a high rate of homelessness, which is not easy, a high rate of poverty. So all these things could come in. But I think another big challenge has been that specifically the CDC, who has been setting the rules, but even states like New York, which is deciding what's essential and what's not, trans healthcare is considered non-essential, which is messed up. But like, I know a lot of people, don't ask me what it is, because I never share stories about my physical transition, but I had stuff scheduled for May. All of it is canceled. But it's not just surgeries and procedures, but even like people who wanna like, and I've been like working with someone who wanted to start hormone therapy. You need to, while everything is they're trying to do, if it's just follow-up appointments, they will do it like over like the phone, over whatever, over the internet. You can't do that. In order to start hormones, you need to do blood work. You can't do that. They will tell you not to come in and to wait until this is over, which is not easy. And I remember that time, especially when someone is ready, these days, the few days or months when someone decides, okay, I'm going to start physical transition, until they actually start, could be, at least for me, and I know for a lot of other people, it's the hardest time emotionally. And I disagree with the way it has been. I do think trans health is essential in every way for him. But unfortunately, I'm not the governor yet.
Well, I think it's a really important reminder. I think often in times of crisis, there's a tendency to think that issues of equity sort of take a back seat, instead of recognizing that issues of equity are actually like baked into the ways that these crises play out and affect people. So I think that's a really important thing to add. We're running out over time. I want to ask one last question, which is actually a big question, but I'll ask you to answer it quickly, and then you can direct us to other conversations you've had about this. But I know people are curious about your thoughts about the show Unorthodox, in which you make a cameo appearance. Do you want to give us a one-line, on one foot take on the show?
My 1 foot take is that a lot of people, I think, have been focusing on the wrong thing. To me, obviously, there are differences. I'm not aware of anything in the show that's straight up wrong. Like, a lot of people have been talking about the sex, for example. I was actually told when I got sex ed in the Hasidic community, and so was my ex. So we're talking about. First of all, we got less sex ed. Esty in the show is getting way too much compared to what me and my ex got growing up, like when we were Hasidic. But also, we were, for example, told to try to keep your nightgown on and just pull it up here, which is what they're doing in the show. A lot of Hasidic people are told to be fully naked. Everyone is told that you need to touch. The question is, do you wear a nightgown at all or not? Whatever, and so on. There are a few things where they're like, obviously there are artistic licenses, so to speak, that are slightly different. But I think the biggest part that we need to focus on is that this is raising awareness about people and about an experience that could ultimately be life-saving for people to not just see themselves on screen, but, and I want to use that example. I started being active in the trans community online in 2012. And in 2015 and 16, after I came out, the way people, the amount of awareness that people had totally transformed thanks to shows like Orange is the New Black, Sense8, even people like Caitlyn Jenner and so on. And the amount of positive result of that is, I can't overstate it enough. I can't, like, it's so powerful because you're able to move on from just trying to explain to people who you are and what you're going to focus on what's important. I think that is the biggest takeaway from Unorthodox. It's shedding light on a story that people don't know enough about, and I'm talking people outside of the Hasidic community and even outside of the Jewish community, and giving us the opportunity to actually get the help and support that we all deserve and need. I will say I did also with JewishLIVE, but I did an event with a forward on Monday, and you can find it on the Forward's Facebook page and on YouTube. I've written a few articles, including on Alma, which is a magazine for Jewish women, a pop culture magazine, really good online about my experience dressing up as a Hasidic woman. There's a lot out there about.
Wonderful. We will look forward to looking at those. Thank you so much, Abby, for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. It was really great to get to talk to you, and I loved your book, and I very much encourage other people to buy it and to read it.
Okay, I do want to give a few, just tell people what's coming up, if I'm allowed to.
Absolutely.
So this weekend, starting from Friday at 8 p.m. to Saturday at 8 p.m., there's something called the Call to Unite. I will share info about it. It's a list of 199 amazing people and celebrities, like hardcore celebrities, like A-listers, plus me. I'm like the 200. I'm like the 199 amazing people, but it's a really cool, really amazing 24 hours of people engaging and talking, and it's going to be very powerful, very beautiful. I'm gonna do a part of that at 4 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. Follow me on social media. I'm Abby Stein on Facebook, and there's Abby Stein on Twitter and Instagram. I will share details of that. On Sunday at 12, we're doing the Sacred Space thing. These are just this weekend alone. I'm doing a lot more events. Again, feel free to stalk me online. Follow me on social media if you want to reach out. And I hope to see you all on many other events and projects. And you should all continue to come to the Jewish Women's Archives event.
Thank you. And I echo Abby's reminder that we have a podcast interview with her in which we cover some different questions and conversations. So I hope you'll check that out at Can We Talk? And we actually have a new season that's underway right now on the podcast. Thank you all so much. I hope you'll join us next week, same time, same place, for our conversation with Rabbi Laura Geller about her book, Getting Good at Getting Older. Followed by the following week, Anna Solomon talking about her new book, The Book of V, which comes out on this Tuesday, so you can get it then. And then the poet Rachel Zucker the following week. So it's wonderful to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation, and wishing everybody a good night, safety, good health, all of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Love you all. And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Abby, this was fabulous. Thank you so much. This was really just such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.